You're listening to another episode of the Turn Autism Around podcast. We are on episode number 85, and today I have my son Spencer Barbera on the show to talk all about the role of siblings. And it's a great show, so let's get to that right now. So thanks for being with us today, Spencer.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I know we've had this in the works for a little bit, so I'm really glad we could fit it in.
Great. So I always start with the same question. Describe your fall into the autism world, but you were born.
I was born at a very young age.
You were born, you already were in the autism world, but do you have any early memories of when autism, you knew the word?
Yeah, probably my earliest memory would be, I guess this is a false memory, it's retrospective, but I remember you telling me that when I was 3, I could say the word autism. Like, that was a regular old part of the vocabulary. So I think that if you dissect that a little bit, it sheds a lot more light on, my home environment and how the frequency that the word autism and that was a Lucas and
right.
that was examined. So I would say from a very early age, I've always been engrossed with my own personal experience of having a sibling with autism.
Yeah, because you were 18 months old when Lucas was diagnosed at the age of 3, and you guys are 18 months apart. So Lucas started therapy in our basement, and so I remember talking to a babysitter and saying something like, I don't know if I should sit Spencer down. And she's like, oh, he uses the word autism with me all the time, and he totally understands what's happening at 3. So we never had the talk about autism or anything, but so why don't you, for those parents and professionals listening that have seen some of my writing about you, and I've done some video blogs. I can put a couple of those videos right here in the show notes under episode number 85. But why don't you catch our listeners up as to what you're doing now, how old you are, and what you're up to?
Yeah, sure thing. I'm currently talking to everyone in the video studio here in Pennsylvania, but for the last 4 years, I've been living in New Orleans, going to university. And now I'm 22, and I'm starting my next big journey. I'm going to medical school, also in New Orleans, for the next 4 years. That's sort of where I'm at right now. I don't know exactly what specialty I want to go into, or I'm leaning more towards procedures, but I don't know. So I'm excited to get back there. I'm starting school in 22 days from when we're recording this.
Wow.
And I think that's a good recap of me.
Yeah. So one of the true blessings of COVID, if there can be any blessings of COVID, is the fact that Spencer moved home with us for the past 3 months. So I've gotten to spend a lot of time with him. So thanks for carving out time your last few days up here to do this interview on siblings.
Oh no, and I said this before, but again, thank you for having me. This is we've kind of had this in the back burner for a while. I'm really glad to be in here.
Yeah, I wanted to get this podcast recorded before he went back, and we are going to talk about siblings and Spencer's sibling journey, and talk about how some other siblings may be feeling. And maybe give some tips that might be helpful for families who have siblings involved in the autism world. We're certainly not experts on siblings. We haven't really. You don't have any really close friends who are siblings of kids with autism.
No, that's right. I do not.
Right. So we are going to use some resources. But before we get to the sibling topic, for those of you that are newer to our world here, Spencer was a part of many video blogs and my first book, The Verbal Behavior Approach. He was 8 years old, I think, when I published that. And now he's 22, and he'll be 23 by the time book number 2 is published, which is anticipated for April of 2021. So you've read about him probably or heard about some of the antics, but just to catch you up, for those of you that don't know anything about Spencer, is he has been a part of like the article that I published with Dr. Rick Cabina, which we talk about on podcast number 14, teaching tax to a child with autism. Spencer was involved because one of the procedures in the study was to make sure that the tax or the labels that we were trying to teach Lucas were appropriate, were age appropriate. So we had Spencer as well as their two cousins, Garrett and Philip, in the preparation for the study by me holding up labels, and then if one of the three of the typically developing children couldn't label it, then it was thrown out from the study. So I actually have a video of Spencer when he was like, I forget how old he was then, maybe 6 years old. So I'm going to try to find that for the show notes. As well as there is a training video on YouTube where I went through and I held up and I said, what is it? Clap your hands, touch your nose, what flies in the sky? And it was verbal behavior training. And that YouTube clip, I forgot to check how many views we have so far, but we're going to post that in the show notes as well. So we have some videos of Spencer's past participation in our journey along here. I also did a video blog way back. It was called When My Fifth Grader Got Detention. Here's the book I gave his teacher. And that book, which is available online for free, which again, we can link in the show notes, is called Behind the Schoolhouse Doors, 8 Skills Every Teacher Needs. And it's all about how to be positive. And Spencer never got detention, but he and his friends in 5th grade were laughing in library class. And so she made them stay in for recess. And I was really not very happy, because if you can't have classroom management abilities and be positive with typically developing 5th graders and give them detention, it's just crazy. So I sent this book about how to be more positive to not only the library teacher, but the principal and the regular homeroom teacher. Do you remember any of that?
No, but I'm glad we just told all the listeners along with me. But no, yeah. Not well.
Yeah, so we're going to link that in the show notes, but if you're not anywhere that you can access the show notes, you can just search Mary Barbera detention, and you'll probably get the video blog with the book download link. I actually had to buy the book, but now a lot of these older books are available for free download, so it's a great book for both parents and teachers, all about how to be more positive. So, okay, now that we have that, and all of that will be in the show notes at marybarbera.com/85, which is going to be your episode. Okay, so siblings. So we just have 2 kids. Lucas is 18 months older than Spencer. And some families have multiple kids with autism. Some families have multiple kids. We are just really going to talk about Spencer's journey and some of these tips and resources, like the Autism Speaks Sibling Guide, which is available for free. And the Autism Society of America also has some really good information about siblings. And I'm actually going to use the Autism Society's bullet points of some of the stressors of siblings and kind of go over that and see if you have any kind of stories or situations where you were faced with any of these stressors. So, embarrassment. A lot of siblings are embarrassed by their sibling with autism, especially around their peers. So do you remember at all feeling embarrassed by Lucas?
I think that in general, kids and teenagers have a lot of embarrassment. Just growing up, even of neurotypical siblings,
right.
You would have embarrassment. So I think it would completely miss the mark if I said no. I can remember though. I feel like I'm much more embarrassed of things that my father did, or than my brother. But yeah, I think there have been instances where I was embarrassed. I remember one time you were trying to we were trying to get Lucas to use the men's room because he was getting to the age where it was like we just wanted to segue because you would always bring him in with you, and then we were at the pool, and I think I was younger. I don't remember how old I was, but you were like, you'd come up to me with him, and I was with my friends, like close friends of mine, and you were like, Spencer, I need you to take your brother to the bathroom, like that kind of thing. And I just remember I kind of flared up, and I gave you a lot of lip, and I was like, I'm not doing that, like blah 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 blah. And after you walked away, like, my friends were kind of like, dude, what was that about? Like, you could just go do that. Like, that's not a big deal. But I was, at the time, it's amplified by everything else that you have going on as a child and all the other perceptions and those sorts of things.
Yeah. And
so you can't necessarily see clearly, and you're...
Yeah. I remember, and I don't
You were
remember,
mad.
Yeah.
You were mad.
Well, I don't remember that episode, but I do remember being at a lecture about siblings, and I don't remember who was giving the lecture, but they said especially in like the tween years, that embarrassment is just a part of being a young a child, a young teenager or a tween. They said even if their parents are like have everything going for them, or wearing the best clothes and are gorgeous.
I absolutely agree with that. Absolutely.
And I do think that in our situation, there's of course kids all over the spectrum. Some with very very aware, and Lucas is pretty impaired, so he is not aware of if someone would make fun of him, call him a name or anything. But I would always say that I would be aware, and it would hurt my feelings or hurt Spencer's feelings to hear something or say something. Do you remember anybody ever, calling him a name or talking about him in an unpleasant way?
Do I? I remember in the second grade, I was on the bus, and a student who was a year older than I was had told me, like, and I didn't really realize what the word was, but I knew what it sounded like. And then I came home and I was like, Mom, I was calling Lucas a word. I think it was like pop-tarted. Like I didn't, I didn't quite get it. And you were like, no, it's something else and that kind of thing. But that, I mean, in the second grade, but that phased out. From what I knew, very quickly.
Yeah. And you and Lucas went to the same public school for most of your lives.
Yes.
And in that environment, it was a public school, but, all along, the school was very, was great with Lucas, and we're, very proactive in anti-bullying and, I think because Lucas was more impaired, like the little kids were treating him almost like they were a junior therapist. They would like mother him or. It was
I can definitely see that because of the degree of his impairment. It was just like
like nobody's gonna make fun of him.
You wouldn't.
Did you ever feel like a junior therapist?
Did I ever feel like a junior therapist?
Like that you were responsible for like teaching him, or like the bathroom was one incident, but did you ever feel like I've gotta,
I think at times, certainly. I'm having trouble thinking of specifics. I remember just last week, because he really likes the iPad. I don't know if the listeners know that. He's a big YouTube guy now. And I was trying to show him some kind of shortcut, but he doesn't know any of those. He does these big workarounds to get to the videos that he wants, so he'll do and so I was trying to show him some kind of shortcut there and trying to teach him that. He wasn't having it, but it's like in that sense, sort of, it just made me think of it when you said teaching things. But I think growing up, definitely instances.
Yeah. And I think another factor was because I became a behavior analyst and wrote a book and was lecturing on autism, like you got sucked into the whole autism world probably in a bigger degree than most siblings.
I mean, I would say that, but because I never knew anything different, so for me I don't, it's hard to compare.
Yeah definitely. Okay, so and I think even I've stated somewhere that I think the most embarrassing incidences with Lucas for me have revolved around bathroom issues, toileting accidents at the pool, when he was young, and then any kind of aggression or self-injurious behavior in public. Because, even some of the minor behaviors, like bringing him to church, and if he'd make loud noises or say something inappropriate,
or belch,
or
right,
or burp.
where they have the acoustics.
So it still is, embarrassing at times because he's not aware that you can't do certain things, in public. But for the most part, he is, he's fully toilet trained, and he's, he's clean and fairly neat. Like when we're out in public, he's not, and he's not aggressive anymore. And so, like, bringing him out in the community is actually fine. The other embarrassing thing, and don't mean to harp on embarrassing, but Spencer, you were always involved in musicals and plays and that sort of thing. And so so it was hard, or Spencer, especially when he was younger, but this is live theater. You don't want your brother who might yell out something inappropriately while you're live on stage to even be there.
I think that was part of it. The other part was he doesn't like to be constricted, or restricted, I guess would be a better word. And so to be in an auditorium with 700 people for 2.5 hours in the dark and have to just sit there and, so part of it was definitely that, a fear of some sort of disruption.
Right. While you were trying to remember your lines.
Not so much for me, just for, the other people who went there that night to just sort of enjoy what they came there to see, what they're trying, because they're trying to get away from, they're going there as an escape and as a release. And the people who've worked,
hard for the show.
Who've worked hard for the show for that to be a unit. So I guess that was an element of it, but really it came from a fear of him, just not him being restricted in that seat, wanting to leave, not being able to.
Yeah. And because he doesn't really comprehend a ton of language, he wouldn't understand the plot. He won't understand anything. So then it's,
the orchestra with the he would be covering his ears and
right. Yeah. So it was just a whole reason why, which actually leads to another point is it's hard to do things as a family unit, especially if kids are, have outbursts or don't comprehend things. Like, I know one of the pieces of advice from Dr. Copeland, who diagnosed Lucas, and Dr. Copeland is on one of our podcasts. We can link that in the show notes as well. He had some good advice when he diagnosed Lucas, and I don't know if you ever heard this, Spencer, but he advised that we should do stuff with me, my husband, and Spencer, me and Spencer, me and Lucas, my husband and Lucas, my husband and Spencer, in different configurations, because really all four of us enjoying a movie, Lucas isn't going to enjoy that. All four of us going to Europe on a plane and
staying in hotels, sleeping. Yeah.
It's just
that kind of.
So, I know that's a factor for many families, but I think we, as a family, just given our circumstances, we really took that advice pretty strongly, because there were lots of things that we did without Lucas, or just me and Lucas would stay home and you and Dad would do something.
Just me and Dad, That's the one permutation of that, is just me and Lucas, which we do. We don't go to Europe or anything, but we'll do stuff with just us.
Right.
Yeah.
And so now, Spencer's been driving for a very long time, but
yes.
And even during COVID, you can, thank goodness, you can handle Lucas. You could stay overnight with Lucas. You could, and Lucas is very happy to be with you. So that's
sometimes.
Yeah.
But
most of the time.
Sometimes he's like, "Oh great, Spencer's here. He's gonna make me walk." I'm like, "Come on, let's go on a walk." And he's there with his iPad, and he'll act like he doesn't hear. I'm like, "You heard me. Come on."
Yeah, and I was nervous when you first went to college that Lucas would really have a problem with that, but Lucas seems to be okay as long as, like, he has his routine. He really is not as affected by people coming and going as most kids.
Mm-hmm.
Even typically developing kids would, I think, would express more of a more issues with having a sibling leave.
Probably likes having the bathroom to himself. No.
Yeah, probably. Okay. So, do you ever remember feeling jealous, which is another stressor? Jealous of the time and the focus that we've spent with Lucas?
No. I feel like I've gotten a good cut of the pie in terms of resources. I don't feel that. I mean, I can see how that would be very different in other experiences for particularly people who also have additional siblings. Right now it's just Luke and I. But if you add a couple more children and everyone's share gets diluted down, then maybe I could see that a lot more. But in terms of my specifics, my situation, no, I didn't feel that way. Yeah.
Okay. Have you ever been the target of aggressive behaviors?
From him, yes.
And was that scary when you were younger?
Yeah, I think that was scary. I mean, I'm very fortunate that he and I we're the same height and we're so similar in age that, my strength sort of parallels his. So I'm never scared of him overpowering, or I wasn't back when he would have aggression. I never really had the fear of him overpowering me or, hurting me severely. But, it is scary when he would get revved up and angry and be biting his fingers and hitting his head and, grabbing and that. That's very scary behavior. But, if I've learned one thing about, I haven't started medical school yet, but I've learned a little bit about neuroscience, and also from my mother, who was a nurse on the spinal cord injury unit at Jefferson for many years. I don't think that that's him when he has those episodes. He's not embodied. He doesn't realize to the extent
right
what he's doing.
And he hasn't had aggression
what he's
for
perceiving.
almost 4 years. Any aggression towards others. He still has occasional self-injurious behavior. And one of my very favorite podcasts is with his psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Murray. That's episode number 28, marybarbera.com/28. And really, we found Dr. Murray when Lucas was 18, and that was really a great thing because with a cardiac medication for Lucas's autonomic nervous system dysfunction, really got rid of the aggression and reduced the self-injurious behavior. So up until that point, when Lucas was 18 and Spencer was 17, probably in the teen years, is when Lucas started with aggression and ended aggression, thank goodness. But it is scary, no matter what the size of the child is. And in my opinion, we shouldn't just accept aggression or self-injurious behavior as part of autism. It shouldn't be a part of autism. It doesn't have to be a part of autism. We just have to, for each child, get to the bottom of why they're having it. Maybe a correlated medical condition like it was for Lucas. It may be in need of better behavioral techniques, but in the end, it's never time to stop and just accept that aggression, because he is over 200 pounds now. And if he had aggression now, and you're not anywhere near 200 pounds. But you're the same, height, but he gets very strong. So we just have to always, keep our eye on the target of no aggression and very little major problem behaviors to increase his quality.
Yeah. Also, it's so if you do have these aggressive tendencies, it's restrictive on what you can and cannot do in life. So now we can almost pretty much worry free. We could go anywhere with him, do anything, go out to any restaurant. He can go over to our grandparents' house and sit and chill out and those sorts of things. We can have, babies by him and that sort of, he has so much more agency and so much more freedom where he doesn't have the aggressive tendencies.
Yeah. So, okay, getting back to our list of embarrassment, being the target of aggressive behaviors that siblings somehow have to deal with. How about, have you remembered feeling frustrated over not being able to get a response from Lucas or engagement? Or when you were younger, do you remember being upset that he wouldn't play with you? Or
No. I would say no to that. But frustration I had felt, but not at its limitations, if you could call them that. I more so felt frustrations with destruction of my belongings and property when I was little. I remember I had this beautiful pair of Hulk hands, like, the big green Incredible Hulk, and they were these big early 2000s foam gloves that, like, you put on, how old was I, 6 maybe?
I don't know.
You put them on and, they make the noise, and they're kind of like boxing gloves, but they're just these big green foam gloves. And I remember getting home one day and all the knuckles were just chewed. I mean, he always loved to pick and tear, and that, and the hands were just they were just completely destroyed. And I just remember the heartbreak because when you're 6, that's a big deal. Like, if he did it now, I'm like, whatever. But I was just like, that were my toys. Like, I liked them, and oh yeah, I was so upset with that. Another thing was I remember I got home one day. And this is when I was very young, but I had this little, like, fish tank, or maybe it was like a fake fish tank kind of thing in my room.
Oh no, it was real.
And I went, oh, real? Okay. Yeah, and I walked into my room, and it was like the wallpaper had been torn off the walls, everything was open, everything was a mess, the fish tank was all over the floor and broken, and there is the culprit, Lucas Barbera, sitting crisscross applesauce in my bed, just stimming his mind out. And I was like, all my stuff, like that, those were really the frustrating points that I recall now as a 22-year-old.
Right. And I remember at some point after 6, when he was so upset, if Lucas would get into his room and destroy things, we got him a padlock
a punch code doorknob. Yeah.
I mean, most people put that on the outside of their house, but we put it on Spencer's bedroom door to prevent Lucas from going in. That actually solved a lot of issues.
I remember someone, it was you, or maybe it was a babysitter. Someone had said, like, the day after, because there was an inciting incident why we got the padlock. I think it wasn't the fish tank incident, but it was an identical. I get back, all the wallpaper's peeled off, and everything's a mess, and I was just so upset. We're like, okay, we'll put the padlock on. So we put the padlock on my room door, and a babysitter, this is like a day or two later, came upstairs, and Lucas was standing outside the room, punching in codes, doing the doorknob knocking. Spencer, let me in. But eventually that subsided. Now I don't have a padlock, but he doesn't try to go in.
And he doesn't destroy things anymore.
Yeah, he does. Yeah, he's much more respectful.
Oh.
He destroys cookies. He destroyed my cookies from the farmer's market the other day, but hey, it's fine. I'm all good with it.
Yeah, so we did get a padlock. We also had 10 years while the kids were young, where we got au pairs to help us supervise Lucas mostly, and also help us with Spencer. And I remember you were really not happy when I told you we were getting our first au pair. You actually were really upset at the thought of bringing a stranger into our house. Do you remember that?
Yeah, well, I remember being upset. I don't remember any kind of incident or meltdown or whatever specific incident you're alluding to, but I can remember the general feeling of being upset about that.
But in the end, it really did help us. Lucas needed so much supervision at that point.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also Spencer was young. He was like 7 when we got our first au pair. And so you needed rides places, and and between Lucas's needs, Lucas wasn't the kind of kid where I could call up a friend and say, hey, I have an appointment, could I drop Lucas off?
Yeah.
Spencer was fine, but nobody was willing to quote unquote keep an eye on Lucas because it was a tough job. But But now he is much calmer, doesn't destroy things, is much more laid back, and is pretty easy to care for. Thank goodness. Okay, so were you ever stressed out, worrying about us, your parents, in terms of our stress and grief, or were you kind of?
No, that might be a kind of selfish answer. I never really considered, how you guys were feeling until this very moment. I'm like,
well, it was just on
it's
the
their
list.
job. I don't. Yeah, I can say I felt, anxieties about like the future and what's going to happen in terms.
Well, actually, that's the next point. So why don't we just go into that? So the next stressor, as listed by the Autism Society of America, is concern over your role in future caregiving.
Oh, that's something. I didn't even see that bullet because it fades into the next page. Okay.
And Spencer,
I independently brought that up for all the listeners.
Spencer did not want to go over any of the questions or what I was going to ask him. So this is all just off the cuff. But okay, so concern over your role of future caregiving. Now, we have discussed that now, but like, when do you remember being first concerned about that? Like, do you remember how old you were?
No, I don't have a specific. I guess that would be better if I had a specific sort of. But no, just sort of a general sort of lingering sense of like what's going to happen here that probably, increases in magnitude with time, as I get older, as time goes on, as I learn, you get older, as we start to see people fall and get dementia and those sorts of things, and as I get older and I start to learn about taxes and home ownership and guardianship, yeah, we were doing that the other day. That sort of stuff, everything gets a little bit realer and it gets a little bit heavier and more, but,
Right. So, it is, I think that is a big concern of, your father and I never wanted you to feel like you couldn't go away to college or you couldn't, plan to live somewhere else. But I know some families, from the get-go, they're kind of counting on their sibling to take the reins. And so I was just, every year we got guardianship. My husband and I got guardianship over Lucas when he was 18, because he literally cannot cross the street by himself or be out in the community alone. And sometimes it's a close call whether guardianship is appropriate, but in Lucas's case, he absolutely needs somebody. He is not conversational. There's nobody in the world that would say he doesn't need a guardian, because it would be impossible for him to survive, without someone with him. So, or caring for him. So every year we have to renew the guardianship paperwork, online now. Over the years it's changed from being all on paper, scanning things in and mailing things into online. And I was just saying to Spencer, he is in our will, as is my sister, as kind of co-guardians of him, should anything happen to my husband and I. But, there are paid guardians and people that can be paid to, he has a lot of care. We're fortunate that, I advocated for a waiver and for care. After we were done with our au pairs, he just needs a lot of care. So we're fortunate to have a lot of services in place to monitor him for many hours in a day. But, I don't think it's fair to the sibling to just expect you to think that Lucas is going to live with you forever, that you're going to have to provide the actual care to him. I mean, that's a lot.
And also to plan that out, I mean, 20 or 30 years from when that would be happening, like that's not realistic. That's not logistically feasible.
So do you have that weighing on your mind at all?
I would say it pops in, it comes and goes, especially with, as I'm starting my career and I'm starting, looking at a big thing with medical school is at the end, you go to residency and you go through a match process. So you don't particularly get to pick where in the country you get to go sometimes. They'll just, um, you rank hospitals, they rank you, and you end up where you end up. And so sort of, is that going to be a problem? And then when you get into the career market, there aren't just jobs everywhere. It's more selective, and will that
Yeah.
be feasible? So yeah, I would say that that's on my mind, but it's not consuming me. And there's still a lot of time out, and a lot of it you just got to wait and see how things go and go from there.
Yeah, yeah. It is a process. And like you said, we can only kind of plan as far as out as we can, and we just have to hope that, there are good people in our lives, and in the future, Lucas will continue to get the care he needs to be happy and independent. Okay, so we kind of covered the main bullets of the stressors for siblings. So if there are families listening with, say, a child or teen with a sibling, are there any overall piece of advice you would give to that sibling?
Any overall pieces of advice? I would say, I feel like there is a lot of pressure, like growing up, sort of to conform, fit in, that sort of thing. And as I'm getting older and I'm going through different application cycles, like college application, medical school application, that sort of thing, uh, it's all about standing out. So that path runs antilateral to how a lot of children are being socialized. And so something that I would say is, like, if you are a sibling of a child with autism, own it. Say that. Talk about that. It's a great talking point. It's something that has had, whether you choose to accept it or not, I would bet, or I guess I should only speak for my own scenario, but it has a massive influence on your identity and on the person that you turn out to be. And so I would own that. I would talk about that. I'd bring that up to people. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of times it can just seem like, oh, this is just how things are. Like, that's not. But no, I think that that's something that makes you really special and can have a very positive impact on your personality development as you get older.
Yeah, and I think that's great because you, with your college essay.
Yeah, with my college essay was on my relationship with my brother. And I thought, is this being cheesy? Is this being extortive? But at the end of the day, I came to realize, no. This is something that, it's had such a profound impact on me and my maturation that this is a valid thing to talk about. Lucas also made his way into my medical school interview. I forgot he was in there, and then going around the table, and I think I'm allowed to say this, one of the interviewers said, I was really touched about what you wrote about your brother. Can you tell me more about him? At my medical school interview. And I was like, absolutely, let's go.
Right.
And just great talking points that I think really revealed a lot, not only about Lucas, but in doing so, it revealed a lot about myself and the relationship that we share and my upbringing. So I would own it. I would talk about it. I would, let people know.
And I do think that I do know many families with siblings, and I do think siblings of kids with autism and kids with disabilities are among the most resilient, mature. If somebody did make fun of Lucas, even when he was little, and especially now, you would be like me. You would not just let it roll off. You would educate them, and you would advocate for Lucas so that he is as safe and happy as he can be at all times. So you, in the end, through all this years of growing up with a sibling, have managed to really grow from the experience. And every family has their own stressors and their own unique circumstances. Our family has autism in it. But no matter, I think your point of don't just conform and try to do things like everybody else. Even if you don't have a sibling with autism, you have a unique set of circumstances.
Yes.
So, look into it, be proud of it. One of the Autism Speaks points is that you should be proud of your brother or sister and be proud of your family and your relationship with him and the fact that you have learned things. And I'm sure when you are a physician, after many more years,
many more.
You will be very compassionate. And you already are compassionate, and I think the whole autism world has definitely led you in the right direction.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah. Well, we are about to wrap up, so I always end the podcast the same way. So we have both parents and professionals listening, and part of my podcast goals are for parents and professionals to be less stressed and lead happier lives. So what are your stress management tips or self-care tips that you'd like to give out? Anything?
Oh, I don't get stressed. Life is just surfing on a rainbow for me. I can't. My mother's laughing right now because she knows, she sees the end of it when I'm like, oh my God, I have 5 papers due and 3 exams. I'm all hyped up. So what would my tips be for parents and professionals that could translate? Yeah, totally. This might be a bit of a basic tip, but one that I think is essential. David Allen's Getting Things Done, which I took from your bookshelf without asking.
Okay, it's a book called Getting Things Done.
You know, he talks about, and this book's really, really old. I think there's a newer edition now, but the one I had talks about, filing cabinets and pocket organizers, that kind of thing. But just the principle of how the human mind is really, really great for doing and for processing and solving problems, but it is terrible at storing them. So to sort of get your whole list and everything that you have to do off of your mind and someplace else, whether that's a little journal or I think you should use an app. I use Things3, which I like, just sort of like a to-do list app, any kind of that. And just, get what you have to do out of your mind and store it someplace else. Use your mind for doing, and
Good.
Then you can actually enjoy more when you're not doing things because you're not worrying about all the things you have to do. It's in a trusted system, it's someplace else, and you can review it when you need to. And I think that's been the single best thing for me personally in reducing stress.
Great. I know another tip in that book is if something is going to take you 2 minutes, don't put it on your to-do list, just do it.
Yes. Yeah, 2 minutes or less.
Yeah. So one of the things as you were saying that last tip, which I think is great, is I did a video blog a year or 2 ago that said basically I want the same 3 things for both of my kids and all of my clients and all of your kids out there. I want every child and adult to be as safe as possible, as independent as possible, and as happy as possible. So I think Spencer's a great example how, we have achieved those 3 things. It's not a finish line. We're not done. We're always going to worry and going to plan for safety, independence, and happiness and get you to the next level. But I think I'm so proud of you for getting there, being, as organized as possible and living away 1,000 miles away from me for the past 4 years and planning on living another 4 years at 1,000 miles away from me. But thanks to COVID, I got 3 months back with you living here. So thank you so much for sharing your tips for siblings and for having this discussion.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me on. I hope, I know I'm a bit of a change from the usual policymakers and psychiatrists and, your usual guests, but I hope from my candor, some listeners can extract some type of useful information and something that might be applicable for them.
I'm sure they will, and hopefully we'll have other episodes with more siblings because I do think that siblings are among the greatest source of strength and resiliency. So thanks again. I'm sure my listeners wish you well for the next 4 years, but maybe we'll have you back again before the end.
I'd love to. We'll
Okay.
talk then.